Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on the Modern Mystics podcast. My name is Alana Kaivalya, and I have the great honor and pleasure today in talking with Raj Patra, who is the owner and founder of Yoga Life in Portland. And we're going to talk to him about cultural appropriation in terms of yoga. This is a very big topic that's happening. I field a lot of questions around it. I actually discuss it quite a bit inside my teacher training program, but I wanted to bring this discussion to my broader audience through the podcast with Raj, who is an amazing force in the field of yoga. And Raj, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
Absolutely. So let's begin just giving the listeners a little bit of an indication as to who you are and where you came from. So tell me a little bit about your yoga journey. How did you get here?
Yeah, my yoga journey started fairly early on. I was born and brought up in Kolkata, in Eastern India. And I grew up in a fairly spiritual family. My father and my grandfather had their own kind of spiritual teachers. There was a lot of classical Indian music. There was a lot of emphasis on education and Western education as well.
Okay.
So I actually started doing yoga since I was about 6 or 7 years old. And the doing yoga part is important to clarify. And
Yes.
that is not necessarily understanding the concepts and the context of yoga, but to actually actively seek reaching a higher state of being, whether that is from a physical practice standpoint, whether that is from a meditative standpoint, etc. So, we grew up even before I could speak words. I think we would go to my grandparents' house and my grandfather would read the Mahabharata and he would translate, or he would talk about it in a modern context, etc. Or modern as in like back then, which is not modern anymore. So that was my beginning. And then I carried through my various practices. And you have to understand that yoga is not an activity. Yoga is not an activity. It is not even a lifestyle. It is deeper than that. It is part of your culture. It is part of your makeup. To be an Indian and not to practice yoga, at least when I was growing up, was not possible. Because I think the Western understanding of yoga is so limited and so boxed within a yoga studio, a chaturanga, a warrior 1, warrior 2, that I think people have a hard time wrapping their heads around it. Anyhow. Yeah. So I came to the United States to go to college when I was about 19 years old. And at that point in time, and this was in the early to mid 90s, and I basically wanted to come here in order to move away from all of the things that is Indian. I was very drawn to the Western education, Western way of life, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as fate would have it, I suppose, about 15 or so years ago, my life kind of went through a very coincidental series of changes, as a result of which I ended up deeply, deeply immersing myself in yoga. For the last 6 to 7 years, I've been exclusively practicing Vajrayana Buddhism under the tutelage of the founder of this lineage called Universal Yoga by Andre Lapa. So Andre Lapa is kind of yoga teacher, and I have been able to blend and find and reinvent my Hindu background, the background of tantric philosophies of yoga, into Vajrayana Buddhism, which of course, it is completely overlapping because they are one and the same. Many people don't understand.
From a different mister.
Yeah, exactly. Many people do not realize that Buddha was actually Hindu.
A yogi.
Yeah. Anyhow, that's my background in short. I have had a yoga studio in Portland, Yoga for Life, for the past 10 years. And I am deeply, deeply committed to furthering the cause of yoga by educating and furthering my journey into yoga by educating folks in any forum that I can. My academic background is in physics and mathematics. And in addition to practicing and teaching yoga, I have a full-time job at a company called Galwa, where we do research for cybersecurity and privacy and a whole slew of other things, cryptography, cryptology, etc.
So you're just a little bit busy, is what you're saying.
Not
Well,
busy
it makes
enough
me
for this
even,
podcast.
I did not know that. It makes me even more grateful that you took the time to be here with me on this podcast. So thank you. I also have studied physics in my undergraduate. So I love that we have that connection in common. And there's a few things that you were mentioning that I want to spend a moment on and unpack a little bit. One of the things that really caught me and stuck with me is this idea that for you growing up in India, yoga wasn't a performance. It wasn't a thing to do. It was really embedded into the fiber of your being. It was embedded into your culture, who you were. It's one of the things that I say to my students, and it's probably something similar. You probably say something similar. Is that yoga is a state of it's a psycho-spiritual state. It's a state of mind and spirit. And our work, if we are going to do air quotes any practices, the point of those things is to make yoga your new normal, which is this way of being. It's not just about the asana. It's not just about, the postures or the sun salutations or how far you can bend. There's something much deeper to it. I think that that's really a wonderful thing to bring forward, because I think as we discuss further this idea of cultural appropriation, which, is such an important topic, I think that's one of the differentiating factors that will assure that we as yoga teachers from the West are honoring the tradition and the roots of yoga, that we're not making it about the performance, that we're actually making it about yoga's goal, which is this state of mind, this state of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that maybe this example will bring it home just a little bit. There are certain practices that go on in India that by all traditions, mindsets, and Western ideas is going to look very, very antiquated. For example, when I came here in the 90s, one of the things that people were very, very interested in was how come we have so many gods and goddesses, and how do you determine which one
People are
is
still
your
interested
god?
in that, Raj.
Yeah. And the big topic was how come you worship cows, or how come you worship a banyan tree, or how come you worship a rock, or how come you worship a river, et cetera, et cetera. And to connect what you just mentioned, the notion of yoga being a part of the fabric of your being, is that I think people here have a hard time understanding that why in India it's set up like this. Depending on who you talk to or which book you read, there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and some sources say hundreds of tens of thousands of deities and gods and goddesses. And the idea is not to look at this from the standpoint of a polytheist society. But the idea was that if you recognize everything around you is divine, everything around you is a god, everything around you has a higher purpose and a higher being, then you are constantly in a state of awe. You're constantly in a place of trying to reach for that state. And the cultivation of yoga, when we are talking about becoming, being, it is a state of being. What better way to be than to be constantly surrounded by the aspirations of that being, right? And so the reason thunderbolt is a god and dark clouds is a god, is the sun, the moon, the grass, the black stone, everything is a god, is not because you need to bow down every single time physically, or recognize or get into a battle of, oh, my stone god is greater than your thunderbolt god. That is not the idea. It is to be constantly in awe of something that is greater than you. So you aspire to become that. And that union is the yoga. I think that people will have to understand that. As a result of which, yoga does not become confined within the four walls of a yoga studio or a yoga school.
It was never meant to be confined. It is very expansive. And, one of the things that comes to mind as you talk about this, so I studied mythology, that's my doctoral work, and as well depth psychology. And one of the things that I recognized and did more research on and about was the fact that there is just a difference between Eastern psychology and Western psychology. It's not good or bad. It's not better or worse. There's no differentiation or hierarchy here, but there is just a difference between Eastern psychology and Western psychology. And yoga, for lack of another way to put it, it is a spiritual psychology. It is meant to truly change our mind, to change our being, to bring us in connection with these things around us, to create and inspire that awe. And that's not something that the Western psyche is necessarily set up for. The mythological traditions of the West, what it is that we are raised with, is more of this idea that God or whoever the being is sits in judgment of us, and that it would be almost a blasphemy to merge with it or to be a part of it. And so, the psychological foundation, this is really set in our early childhood. So if you were born in the East, you have an Eastern psyche. If you were born in the West, you have a Western psyche. And again, I think it's simply a recognition for us as Westerners who are, we really are propagating yoga. Westerners we need it so badly. That's my belief as to why it's taken root here and flourish. We need it so badly, but we have to remember that it's important that we expand our consciousness to fit what yoga's goals are, what yoga is truly asking us to do, which is to be in awe, which is to merge. And to just recognize perhaps our own stories, limitations, backgrounds that set us up for judging that or feeling limited by that or fighting against that. That's something that we can do individually, as we try to honor the tradition of yoga. Which I guess brings me really to my next question. Raj, I'd like to just spend a moment just like defining what is cultural appropriation in terms of yoga. What does that mean? And what does that mean for us now in modern culture and times?
Yeah. Let's see. When I look at, even in the conversation that we have had, we are kind of trying to focus on the East versus the West. And pretty much most of the conversations that I've been engaged in, whether that is cultural appropriation or just a general conversation, I think we are fast approaching a vocabulary that is very, I call it drawing lines. So, you have planet Earth, and then you have the East and the West, and then you have the North, and then you have United States. And then within United States, you have immigrants versus not. And then you have white immigrants versus colored immigrants. Then you have older white immigrants, first generation, second generation, those who practice yoga versus those who don't. Those who are skinny and practice yoga versus those who are not skinny and practice yoga. Those who are old and skinny and practice Iyengar yoga versus those who are not old, not skinny, practices Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga. And so all of these drawing lines, what it is doing is that it is boxing us, every individual, every conversation, every thought, every aspiration, into such a tiny, 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 tiny slice that the freedom of yoga fundamentally means union. So what we're doing in drawing these lines is completely an antithesis of yoga. Yes. And until and unless we can come to terms with that, I think any conversation around cultural appropriation will not matter. Because the conversation and the context of the conversation would not even be skirting the same topic that is at the center, and that is yoga. So we have to come to terms with that. And and when we are talking about yoga, we have the first step towards cultural appropriation and overcoming such in yoga is the following. We think that we can do yoga, or we can reach a state of yoga, or that somebody can lead me towards it, etc., etc. But my mind goes to, well, just like a fish does not know that it is swimming in water, right? We do not know that we are constantly doing yoga.
We are already in yoga.
We could not exist without. So to think that it is a book, a teaching, a concept, and understanding will be a misunderstanding of yoga. And as long as we are in that state, we cannot even begin to have the conversation of what is culturally appropriate versus inappropriate. So that's the context I wanted to set. This notion of union versus, oh, what you are saying is wrong and what I am saying is right, my viewpoint, your viewpoint, which is fundamentally divisive. And as a result, we cannot come to any kind of a meaningful merge. I chalk up cultural appropriation as the responsibility of both parties. The one who feels insulted, quote unquote, and the one who is insulting. Mm-hmm. It has to be, in fact, I hold, anytime I have encountered someone or something that has meant cultural appropriation to me, I hold myself more responsible for my effort in helping overcome that situation. For example, I will tell you something that probably for many of our audiences will come across a little bit shocking. But the moment I mention this, it will become very, very clear. So imagine Jesus. Imagine Jesus Christ. And imagine that you walked into my home and you saw that I have, imagine that particular form of Jesus or expression of Jesus Christ, which has the thorn crown, the blood, the head, the crucifixion, the look away, yeah? And imagine that as you walked into my home or my house, you saw that I have a sculpture of that, but with the head cut off. I have a cut head of Jesus sitting on my study desk. And it will be very shocking. You'll be like, what have you done to our God? But the same thing exists all the time. You have no idea how many houses I've been to where the same deity of Buddha with his head cut off is sitting on countless tables and chairs, right? At yoga studios, everywhere. Like if you go to any shop that is Eastern shop, Nepali shop, or Indian shop, you will see countless number of gods and goddesses whose heads have been cut off and they're just sitting there. So while that is perfectly okay because somebody is selling it and somebody is buying it, right? It is my responsibility to show contextually what this looks like as a result of you to help you understand how it's appropriate versus inappropriate. If I did not do that, I cannot be the recipient of cultural appropriation. I have not earned that respect. Does that make sense? And after I explain that to you, if you don't take the proper steps, then the onus is on you to figure out why it is that you want to do something. Whether that is truly in the path of yoga, as in unifying everything, or whether it is down the path of creating lines and creating segments where you want to box yourself, or we want to box ourselves in a place where we are immune. Those edges are calcified. Yeah, they're impermeable. So that is something that I hold dearly. As in, what is my responsibility in this? So I cannot get offended. I cannot get angry. I cannot shut down. That will not help anybody, you know? Yeah.
It's like working with children.
It is, yes.
unless it's ours, if we teach the children what to
Right.
do,
Yep.
then then they know, and once they know, they hopefully can grow to be more responsible adults. I mean, I
Yeah.
think when I think about it, because I've been having conversations a lot like this, where my eyes are being opened to how I can do better in my community, to how I can be more inclusive, helping me to reveal my blind spots. And I'm always so grateful when someone says, this is where you're not seeing something, or this is where you've missed something, right? And you're right. Once I have been shown that this is where I'm missing something, it's absolutely my responsibility to do better. I think the other side of cultural appropriation that I see people talking a lot about is the West sort of running away with yoga and trying to make it into something completely different, trying to peel the spirituality off of it, trying to make it into a solely fitness oriented practice, trying to, again, for lack of a better term, to whitewash it and
Mhm.
then to make money off of that. And I think that that's really where some edges come up for people. And have you run into that at all? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is impossible to not run into that.
Yeah,
I think 99.99% of the yoga practitioners and yoga teachers. I don't worry so much about the yoga practitioners. I do worry about the yoga teachers and their
hmm,
motivation, and the yoga studio owners and their motivations, because they have, to whom much is given, much is expected.
right. It's a beautiful way
And
to say it,
to
Raj.
call you, yeah, and to call yourself a teacher is a privilege.
Yes.
And that means you have been given much. You have been given all the privileges to call yourself a teacher.
Yeah.
And with that privilege comes an expectation that you will be truly vested. Just like I would not go to a dentist who has never been to the dental school, I would not want to consider somebody a yoga teacher who has not immersed themselves not only in the study of yoga, but actually immersed themselves in understanding the culture that is India, where it was originated. You
Absolutely.
have no idea, Alana, how many yoga teachers, celebrity yoga teachers, famous yoga teachers who even have meaningful things to say, have never been or stepped into India.
That's right.
And that blows my mind. It's like you are claiming that you are a professor of Chinese art, but you have never bothered to go to a Chinese museum
Yeah.
or visit China or see the Great Wall of China. And this is an interesting thing, because human progression has always occurred as a result of two key ingredients. No progress would have been made. We would still be in the cave if these two ingredients were not present. One is curiosity, and the other is energy, our
Hmm.
willingness to spend energy. And these two things has to equally be present, because if any one of them were off, then you will experience an illness, so to say.
Yeah.
Example, if your curiosity was very low and your desire, your willingness to burn energy, to pursue that curiosity was very low, you would be in a very tamasic state. You
Right.
would be hopeless. You would be hopeless. That would be the diagnosis. If your curiosity was very high, but you were not willing to invest any energy into it, then you would simply be seeking entertainment. And I think, which is why we go to shows and
Sure.
movies that are, or magic shows, or
Yeah.
America's Got Talent. The entire world of television art is taking advantage of this and this alone. That majority of the people, the audiences of these shows, have high levels of curiosity, but they don't want to invest any energy. So that
Right.
becomes an entertainment. If you had very low curiosity, but you had a high desire to burn energy, then you would become ill. You would be constantly in a state of surprise. And to be constantly in a state of surprise creates a lot of anger.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you look at these three ways of the ingredients of curiosity and the willingness to burn energy to pursue that curiosity, then the world will make perhaps a little bit more sense. And that gives me a lot of comfort. So there are certainly yoga practitioners and yoga teachers that I see who have no curiosity to know where this is coming from and who do not have any energy to burn. So they are, if folks are in that state of development, I will not be surprised at all if their relationship with yoga was go and take the same class from the same teacher in the same studio for the rest of their life. It is a very tamasic. It is a very tamasic state of existence, and I wish them success in the rest of their life. Let's take the second part, which is a high level of curiosity, but no desire to fuel that curiosity with any level of effort. And I think when I look at the Western world and the Western teachers of yoga and the Western yoga studio owners, they primarily fall within this bracket. Mm-hmm. In other words, they are seeking entertainment, but not education. However, they want to call themselves a yoga teacher whose primary job is to educate others. So therein lies the contradiction. And I think that is not just a cultural appropriation, that is an appropriation across the board for calling yourself a teacher.
Yeah. It's also a disservice to the students, you know, because the students don't know what they don't know. And they're coming to teachers. You know, one of the things that I've always thought is that there's a reason why 30 million Americans identify as yoga practitioners. They need something from it. There's a gaping hole in our psyche that they somehow, even unconsciously, understand that yoga can fulfill, because they could do any other form of exercise. They could go to Pilates, they could go to spin class, you know, which frankly are probably better physical forms of exercise. And yet they choose to do yoga, yet they choose to go to the studio. And the questions that they come to their yoga teachers with are not, where do I point my big toe in triangle pose? The questions they come with are, what does this all mean? What is my purpose? How do I survive this breakup? You know, they are looking for spiritual support. Yeah. We don't have, well, we're, you know, when yoga teachers aren't trained to be a spiritual leader, to hold that post, we are lacking in what you're saying as far as the creativity, or curiosity rather, and the energy, because this is it's such a responsibility, Raj. It's such a responsibility to be a yoga instructor. It's such a responsibility to call yourself a yoga teacher. I think, you know, being more educated obviously is one huge piece of that. And I love that we're talking about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. To finish the previous thought, which brings us to those folks who are so bent out of shape around cultural appropriation. And that primarily, I think, in my humble opinion, those folks fall within the third category. They have a lot of energy to burn, but they have no curiosity. They have no curiosity to bridge the gap. And they get bent out of shape if somebody says something about something that they think they're protecting somebody else who they do not know and have no curiosity to learn or understand in some unknown way. And that's the fallacy. That's the fallacy. If I had one message for yoga teachers, that would be, assuming that they are yoga teachers in the context that we're talking about, is to help all beings around them, whether they're students, acquaintances, family members, what have you, to burn this curiosity and the force of energy simultaneously and lift that up. And I think that is true teachership. And people really need to do that. We also need to soften the edges of the boundaries that we hold ourselves within or see each other, you know. Yeah, it breaks my heart when I see students come to my yoga studio and says, well, I didn't like this. And that shows the already established understanding that people have about yoga, you know. I have also heard another side of the story, which is, oh, what you're talking about is so idealized. It is impossible for us to be all speaking the same language or see divinity in us. It is idealized. But you know, yoga is about the ideal. To reach a state of enlightenment is ideal. This notion of union, of God realization within you is ideal. This even to the level, it's almost like my response is, well, there was a point in time, I'm sure, where holding a warrior pose or perfect downward facing dog, whatever that means, or a handstand or a crow pose was very, very idealized. But that
Yeah.
did not stop you from going to the yoga studio time and time and time again and practicing whatever it is that you practice.
Well, that's the practice, isn't it? I mean, there will never be a moment at which we as yoga practitioners or teachers get to tick the box.
Correct.
You know, there's always an idea, an ideal. There will never be a done. And so the practice is constantly working and sharpening, you know, your blade, sharpening your tools, sharpening your resiliency to
Yeah.
continuously move toward. It's never ending. It's going to be
Correct.
a
Yeah.
lifelong project.
Absolutely. So many people have when I mentioned that, I have a yoga teacher, and my yoga teacher has a yoga teacher,
Sure.
and he also has a yoga teacher, and his yoga teacher also has a yoga teacher. I'm not saying this theoretically. I can name names, and they
Right.
all exist today. And there is no uh, it does not mean my yoga teacher is older than me and his yoga teacher is older than him and his yoga teacher is older than him. It does not matter. It matters how far in the journey, in the path of this process of this realization, the union you are in. And the other interesting thing is the folks who are actually teaching yoga, majority of them do not feel that they have a need for having another teacher of their own. How many yoga teachers do you know who have reached this state of celebrity-ness and have a yoga teacher? And that in itself sets the false stage that yoga has a ceiling that you can reach to your point, right? And as a result, it would be very easy for the folks who are not integrated with that culture, who don't have that curiosity to learn, to see what the overall purpose and journey of yoga is.
I do think that that's a very Western, I think that's a very Western thing, you know, and to just kind of call it out, right?
Yeah.
Western psychology very much honors and appreciates the individual. And we like it when we are the creators of something or the originators of something, right? Like I think of, I mean, I can think of a bunch. For some reason right now, coming to mind is Tony Robbins. Right.
Sure.
And Tony Robbins, of course, learned a bunch of different techniques. But when you think of Tony Robbins, it's Tony Robbins stuff. You know, in the culture of yoga and India, this idea of lineage is where the power comes from. Here in the West, it's viewed as I don't know, maybe a weakness, or you know, that it's not yours somehow. So I think if I just had to name it, that's what I would say is kind of happening there.
And that's very well put. And I think if we were to leave this conversation with one message, that is cultural appropriation. The constant need for, and not only cultural appropriation, but it's fundamentally plagiarism, right? It seems that anything that we are able to put in the form of a law gets respected. And anything that cannot be put in the form of a law gets taken advantage of. And I think that's what is going on. To think of yoga as a tool of personalization and commoditization and capitalization is the greatest cultural appropriation that I can experience. And that not only insults yoga, but deeply, deeply saddens me at a core level. The motivation should not be, how can I make money out of yoga? The motivation should also not be, I'm a yogi, so I must starve myself to death. There's plenty for everybody.
Money can be made. It's just that shouldn't be the driving force. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And if you are teaching doing something that is worth following, then you will not have to worry about money.
Right.
But if your offering is so minuscule and you're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, then yeah, you should be afraid that people will catch you. And as a result of this afraid, you would want to draw more lines around you and keep people outside of that line. And as a result, you are not fundamentally practicing yoga. And that would be the lie. And that would be the cultural appropriation.
Yeah, that's a great just a great way to put it, Raj. I think that, you know, I really get sad when I see folks basically they're missing yoga, you know, and they're trying to propagate it in such a way that actually doesn't honor what yoga can bring to us, which is this psycho-spiritual state of wholeness, which is this state of interconnectivity. It's like, that's pretty glorious, you know. Why wouldn't we integrate that into our teachings? But I think that there is, you know, there are, as you said, the limitations of the energy and or the curiosity. So as I have been thinking about this topic, which I do actually think about this a lot, and we talk about it a lot inside my teacher training, it seems to me that there are two ways, you know, I'm thinking of my listeners and, you know, them going like, what do I do? How do I, you know, what do I do here? Right. So to me, it seems that there are kind of two ways to really make sure that we are not just A, and probably most importantly, in alignment with yoga, but B, doing our best to not trespass with this cultural appropriation idea. And the two ways that I think of are, number one, education. Take responsibility for truly educating yourself and being educated around what yoga is. And I'm not talking about triangle pose, you know. And then B, being honorific, honoring yoga's roots, trying not to, you know, we don't want to make yoga seem as if it was born and kind of self-effulgent here in the West. It actually did come from India. It does have a millennia-long history. It is critically important to go to India at some point. I always tell my students that going to India is like meeting the parents of the person you're dating. You're dating yoga. You and yoga have an intimate relationship. It's going well. You got to go home and meet mom and dad, because when you go home and meet mom and dad, suddenly you understand so much more about that person you're spending time with, which in this metaphor is yoga, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I think you honor the roots, honor the tradition, you know, really stand in awe, in reverie of this gift that the world has been given, which is this yoga practice. I remember actually being in India once and talking with one of my teachers about this. And he said to me, yoga is India's gift to the world. And honestly, that stayed with me. And it's probably been, you know, a decade or so since I've heard that. But it's like, what do you do with the gift, Raj? You know, when somebody presents you with a gift, you don't stomp all over it. You don't, you know, take off the wrapping and just take the wrapping. You open the box, you know, you look at it with joy and gratitude, and you place that gift somewhere special in your home, which for us, our home is our body. So you place it somewhere special inside your body. So as far as what to do, that's what I've come up with: education, honor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think they're spot on. I truly think they're spot on. I think that the world is not that doom and gloom as we see it. There are some noisemakers, and they will make noise. I think everybody, every soul is on a path of evolution. I think the biggest mistake we can make is to practice yoga and deny the two foundational pillars of yoga, and that is the notion of reincarnation and the notion of karma. And if somebody cannot come to terms with these two facets, then they cannot practice yoga. It's like going swimming, but not coming in touch with water. It's not possible. So you cannot practice yoga unless you come to terms with these notions of reincarnation and the laws of karma. And karma is not like how the Western people understand it's like karma is a bitch. That's not so.
No,
people
it's a
really
very Western understanding based on the Western psyche, of course.
Right. Pardon me for cursing, but I think that once people come to terms, once the yoga practitioners and the teachers come to terms with the notion of reincarnation, this burning desire that I am born and I will die, and within this limited period of time, and since I do not know when I'm going to die, it is a constant uncertainty and a burden above my head. So I need to accumulate as much of all that I can. This craving, this hungry ghost attitude of all experiences of life doesn't help their pursuit of yoga. But if you could just slow down and think that maybe I will not reach a certain state that I want to within this lifetime, but I have plenty of other, then that at least helps me slow down. That helps me find meaningful things to do in life as opposed to simply accumulating everything that I can within this life. And from that standpoint, I fundamentally believe that every soul is on an evolution, a journey. And in this lifetime, it can only evolve so much, and that is okay. You just have to be at peace and patient with it. So if all of the true and well-educated yoga teachers of the world were to unite all together, even under those idealistic circumstances, it would be foolish for us to think that we can really change all souls and bring them to a state of evolution. It would be a magical moment, but it will simply be that. It will be magical. So let young souls be young souls. And just like little kids want to run around, and I mean no disrespect, human beings are human beings, and a child has to be a child before they can become an adult, before they can become a wise adult, right? So it is okay for a child to bang around and fall millions of times. But that child has to learn, and therein lies the key ingredient. If they have lost the desire to learn, to look up to something, then it's a lost soul, and nobody wants to live life like a lost soul. No. So that's just breathe. It is okay. Soften the edges of your boundaries. Soften the edges of me versus you. Soften the edge of Eastern versus Western, and turn on the curiosity. And once the curiosity is turned on, think about how you can fuel that. Educate yourself on yoga, as you said. Seek teachers. Seek teachers. And if people are truly seeking by putting in the energy behind that curiosity, teacher will show up. It has happened for my life on multiple occasions, and I have seen other folks go through the same process. But to walk into a convenience store that is called a yoga studio in your neighborhood and fall in love with the one person who was wearing a t-shirt that had Ganesh on the left shoulder or a tattoo on the right hip, it's just a tremendous waste of a human life and the journey within this lifetime.
So much more richness to be cultivated within yoga, for sure. I want to ask you one quick question, because I can imagine that some listeners will be curious. The reincarnation piece is difficult for many Westerners, isn't it? That's not what that's not a part of our psyche, you know, and it very much will sometimes go against the grain of structured belief systems or religions. And I want to ask you, you know, because I do think that yoga is and can be for everyone, regardless of belief system or religious practice. I do think that it was set up to hold and host a variety of belief systems, that you can bring your belief system to yoga. So if someone says, hey, you know what, I'm actually I'm really into this. I want to check this out more. I like this idea of connectivity. I like this idea of digging deeper. I like to say that, you know, if you bring your belief system to yoga, then yoga acts as like a magnifying glass with the sun, helping you to set fire to your heart, right? So if someone says, well, okay, you know, I come from a Christian background, or I come from a Jewish background, reincarnation isn't a part of that. How do I still participate fully in this practice?
Yeah. So many thoughts come to mind. How much time do we have? So I think that
just give us like a little nutshell tidbit.
I think there are so many events that happen in our life that cannot be explained without this notion of reincarnation. And putting that aside, what will make you happy? to slow down and cherish life, knowing that there is an unlimited amount of time to cherish it all and that you will not be left behind, versus this constant rat race. And the thing about spirituality and evolution is that whichever thought makes you feel warm and calm at heart, chances are that is the truth. If something brings you immediate agitation, if something makes you not see the world as a whole and for a higher purpose, that is probably away from the path of spirituality and yoga. So I don't need to say anything. I don't need to put a magic mantra in anybody's heart to make them, or in their mind, to make them come to terms with reincarnation versus their own belief system. My wish for all human beings is to find peace within their heart, love and compassion towards themselves just as much as towards others. And if they can honestly, authentically be in that state, does not matter what religion they're practicing, does not matter what yoga they're practicing, they are practicing yoga, because yoga's goal is to basically help you fall in love with yourself, fall in love with every tree, every rock, every thunderbolt, every dark cloud, every fire in your life. So I believe you with that.
I think that's great. And I think that's a wonderful place for us to wrap up. And people will have so much to think about because of our conversation. But before we go, please tell our audience and our listeners, where do we find out more about you? How do they follow you? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my yoga studio is can be found as yogaforlifepdx.com, which is Portland. My personal website is Raj Patra Yoga. And the program where people can learn a lot more about what we have started discussing in depth, not only as a generic notion of yoga that is untouchable or unreachable, but how they individually can pursue that, is through a program that I call Purposeful Living, How to Live with Your Purpose. And that gets into finding your dharma, this place of joy, this place of contentment. And that starts on September 11th, coincidentally, and it's a 6-weekend program, so people can go to find out all of that. Otherwise, Raj Patra Yoga is my Instagram handle, I think is what it's called. I do not know.
Yeah.
I'm not.
That's right.
They are happy to connect with me from that way.
And I know that they will. So Raj, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the discussion, and I look forward to hopefully chatting with you more in the future.
Definitely. Thank you for the opportunity.